On the morning of July 14, 1984, 62 civilian tourists aboard a Cape Cod whale-watching vessel filmed an animal that the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution would publicly identify as an unusually large great white shark, likely an immature female. The bite radius measured from a single frame of the recovered footage was 38 inches. That measurement exceeds the largest documented great white shark on record by more than a factor of 2. Two civilian 8mm home movie cameras recorded the encounter from two separate whale-watching vessels working the same waters that morning. What both reels of film show is a humpback whale calf being killed at the surface beside the hull of a 65-foot tour boat by an animal whose dorsal fin stood higher than the upper observation deck rail and whose body was visibly longer than the vessel itself. The footage from the second boat, filmed from a quarter-mile west by a passenger whose name has never been entered into the public record, captured the entire encounter in a single wide frame. Woods Hole reviewed both reels. The internal memo written by the junior researcher who objected to the institution's published finding was suppressed for 7 years. To understand what is on those two reels of film, and why the most prestigious marine science institutions in the United States have spent 40 years refusing to use the only word that fits, we need to go back to 7:42 on the morning of July 14, 1984, when the Dolphin Fleet vessel Cetacean cleared Provincetown harbor with 62 paying passengers aboard for what was scheduled to be a 4-hour whale-watching tour of Stellwagen Bank. Provincetown sits at the curved tip of Cape Cod, Massachusetts, the easternmost point of land along the New England shore. In 1984, it was the home port of one of the oldest commercial whale-watching fleets on the American Atlantic coast, working a documented humpback feeding ground 25 miles east of the harbor, known as Stellwagen Bank. Stellwagen is a shallow sandbank rising to within 60 feet of the surface from a surrounding seafloor that drops, on its eastern slope, into the Wilkinson Basin, 1,000 feet of water within the span of less than 2 miles. It is a federally documented great white shark corridor. It would be designated a national marine sanctuary by act of Congress 8 years after the events described in this report. The Cetacean was a 65-foot wooden-trimmed inspected passenger vessel certified to carry up to 98 people. Her captain on the morning of July 14, 1984, was a 47-year-old Provincetown native named Owen Beltran, who had operated whale-watching vessels on Stellwagen Bank for 19 consecutive seasons. Beltran's radio transmission to United States Coast Guard Station, Provincetown at 9:11 that morning, is preserved on a 1/4-inch reel-to-reel tape held in the station's archives. In that transmission, Beltran identifies himself, gives his coordinates, and then makes a single statement that the Coast Guard radio man who took the call later described under oath as the only time in 23 years on the radio that he heard a captain stop talking in the middle of a distress call and not start again for 46 seconds. The statement was, "There is something in the water beside my boat that is longer than my boat." The Cetacean departed Provincetown Harbor on schedule at 7:42. Her passenger manifest, recovered from the Provincetown Harbormaster's office in 1991 by a researcher with the Center for Coastal Studies, lists 62 names, 28 adults, 18 senior citizens on a charter from a retirement community in Worcester, Massachusetts, and 16 children under the age of 12. Among the adults was a 34-year-old elementary school teacher from Dayton, Ohio, named Corinne Doyle, who was on Cape Cod for the 3rd consecutive summer with her husband and 2 children. Corinne Doyle had brought with her on the trip a Kodak 8mm home movie camera that she had purchased the previous Christmas. The reel of Kodachrome film loaded in the camera that morning would, by the end of the day, become Exhibit A in a scientific dispute that would eventually involve Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, the Smithsonian Institution, and a junior marine biologist whose career would never recover. She did not know that. She was on vacation. The Cetacean reached the western edge of Stellwagen Bank at approximately 8:40. The morning was hazy. The Atlantic was flat calm, and visibility was 8 to 10 nautical miles. Captain Beltran's log entry for that hour records the sighting of a humpback cow and calf pair feeding on the northwest slope. The cow and calf were a familiar pair to the Provincetown whale watch fleet. The cow had been cataloged in the Center for Coastal Studies Fluke Identification Database in 1979 under the designation Atlantic Humpback Female 411, known to the Dolphin Fleet captains as Sterling for the silver pattern on her tail flukes. The calf was her third documented offspring and had been born in the Caribbean breeding grounds the previous winter. At 8:48, the cetacean came to a slow drift approximately 200 yards south of the cow-calf pair, in accordance with federal whale watching guidelines. Beltran cut his engines. The 62 passengers came to the upper observation deck rail with cameras. Corinne Doyle began filming. Her reel was the first of the two that would later be recovered. For 4 minutes and 17 seconds, the footage shows what every passenger on the vessel believed they were watching. A normal feeding sequence, the cow surfacing for breath, the calf staying close to her flank, no other vessels visible on the horizon to the east. At 8:52 and 40 seconds, the timestamp embedded in the magnetic strip on the original film cartridge, the cow-calf pair changed their behavior. The cow descended. The calf surfaced alone. It surfaced with a wound, the shape and approximate dimensions of a household bathtub missing from its left flank. The Corinne Doyle footage shows the calf surface, list to its damaged side, and begin to roll. It shows nothing in the water around the calf. Whatever had taken the bite was beneath the surface. For 11 seconds of recovered film, the only motion in the frame is the slow rolling of the dying calf, the surface of the green-gray Atlantic flat and unbroken on every side of it. Then, in the lower right corner of Corinne Doyle's frame, a wide V-shaped wake began to spread. The fossil record of Otodus Megalodon, the prehistoric apex predator, commonly referred to as Megalodon, is exceptionally well documented in the waters off the New England continental shelf. Fossil Megalodon teeth have been routinely dredged from the seafloor on George's Bank, the broader fishing ground that includes Stellwagen, since at least the early 1960s. The Harvard Museum of Comparative Zoology in Cambridge, Massachusetts, has held a curated collection of these dredged George's Bank Megalodon teeth as part of its permanent vertebrate paleontology archive since 1962. The Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C., holds the comparative type specimens against which all subsequent Megalodon morphology is measured. In 1983, the year before the cetacean incident, a peer-reviewed paper published in the journal Paleobiology documented bite marks on fossilized Miocene whale vertebrae recovered from the same continental shelf system. The paper concluded that the bite radius, tooth impression spacing, and bite force inferred from the marks were consistent with attacks by Otodus Megalodon on prey items in the size range of small to medium baleen whales. The paper specifically noted that the predation pattern ambushed from below on cow-calf pairs, with the lethal bite delivered to the calf's flank, was a recurring signature in the fossil record. The official extinction date for Otodus Megalodon, as published by the National Marine Fisheries Service and accepted by every accredited marine science institution in the United States, is approximately 3.6 million years ago. In the lower right corner of Corinne Doyle's frame, a wide V-shaped wake began to spread. The dorsal fin that produced it broke the surface of the green-gray Atlantic 11 seconds later, and what stood above the waterline of Stellwagen Bank that morning measured, by the subsequent forensic analysis of the recovered film, between 15 and 17 feet in vertical height from waterline to fin tip. The 62 passenger statements taken by the Massachusetts Environmental Police in the days following the incident are not in agreement on what happened next. 29 of the passengers, including all 18 of the senior citizens from the Worcester Retirement Charter, described the animal as a great white shark, citing the dorsal fin and the mottled gray color as their reference points. 18 passengers described it as something larger than a great white, but were unable or unwilling to identify it further. 12 passengers refused to characterize it. 3 passengers described it as a creature, not a shark. Corinne Doyle was one of the 3. Her statement to the Massachusetts Environmental Police, taken at the Dayton, Ohio, post of her local sheriff's department on July 22, 1984, 8 days after she returned home, contains the following sentence, which has been preserved in the original record. I have seen great white sharks on television documentaries my entire adult life, and what came up beside that boat was not a great white shark. Captain Beltran's wheelhouse statement, taken at the Provincetown Harbormaster's office on the afternoon of July 14, 1984, was even more specific. There is no shark in any of my training, in any of my books, in any of my 19 seasons on this water. That is the size of what passed alongside my vessel. I am not telling you it is impossible. I am telling you it is not a shark I have ever heard of. What both Corinne Doyle's reel and the second recovered reels show, and what the wide angle from the second whale watching vessel, a quarter-mile to the west captured in a single uninterrupted frame, is the moment the animal surfaced. The second reel was filmed by a passenger aboard the Dolphin Fleet vessel Portuguese Princess, which was working the southwestern edge of Stellwagen Bank that morning, approximately 1,400 yards west of the cetacean. The name of the passenger who operated the second camera has never been entered into the public record at his own request. His film, like Corinne Doyle's, was a Kodak 8mm Kodachrome reel. His framing was wide. In a single uninterrupted 4-second segment, his footage shows the entire scene in one frame. On the left side of the shot, the cow humpback in a defensive arch with her tail flukes raised above the water. On the right side of the shot, the cetacean idling on the calm Atlantic with 62 civilian figures visible at the upper observation deck rail. And in the open water between the whale and the boat, surfaced and advancing across the calm green-gray Atlantic, from right to left, toward the wounded calf, the animal. The footage shows a broad, blunt skull above the waterline. It shows a raised upper jaw with enormous triangular teeth visible above the water. It shows oversized gill slits along the side of the head. It shows thick ridged hide mottled dark gray with pale calcified patches catching the hazy July daylight. It shows the long mottled back breaking the surface behind the head and extending several body lengths aft of the skull. It shows an enormous dark dorsal fin, thick and rigid, with barnacle clusters along its leading edge and water streaming off the trailing edge in heavy sheets. The body of the animal in the second reel is visibly longer than the 65-foot cetacean in the same frame. The wake spreading behind the animal as it advances toward the dying calf is wide enough to flatten the surrounding swell on either side for a span of dozens of yards. Corinne Doyle's reel, filmed from the upper observation deck of the cetacean, captures the same animal from the opposite angle, closer, at a steeper down-looking perspective, from the position of a tourist standing at the rail directly above the creature as it passed the boat. In her footage, the dorsal fin stands several feet above the wooden upper deck rail. The mottled ridged back beneath the green-gray surface extends forward of the bow of the cetacean and continues aft beyond the stern of the vessel. The man at the rail directly above the animal in Corinne Doyle's frame is wearing a short-sleeved blue shirt and a sun visor. His hands are gripping the wooden rail. His face is turned downward. The animal's deep-set black eye, on the right side of its head, is visible above the green-gray surface of the Atlantic at the level of the rail. The man at the rail and the animal in the water are looking at each other. The Massachusetts Environmental Police investigation of the cetacean incident concluded on July 29, 1984. Their final report, filed under case number MEPMS 840714, characterized the incident as a documented marine wildlife encounter. Predator species unidentified, no human casualties, no vessel damage, no further action recommended. The case was closed. For 7 years, the public record contained no further developments. Then, in 1991, a researcher with the Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies, preparing a retrospective on Stellwagen Bank wildlife encounters, submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution for the original 1984 forensic analysis of the recovered film. The documents that came back included a one-page internal memorandum dated August 19, 1984. The memorandum was written by a junior researcher in the Woods Hole Shark Biology Department who had been assigned to perform the bite radius measurement on the recovered film. Her name was Dr. Marion Whitcomb. Her measurement of the bite radius from the calf wound, taken from a single frame of Corinne Doyle's reel scaled against the stationary hull of the cetacean visible in the same frame, was 38 inches tooth tip to tooth tip, the largest confirmed great white shark bite radius on record. At the time of her analysis was 16 inches. Her memo recommended that the institution withhold its public finding until the second reel, the wide footage from the Portuguese princes, could be independently verified. She was overruled within 48 hours by her department chair. The wide footage was never publicly authenticated. Dr. Marion Whitcomb was 28 years old in 1984. She had completed her doctorate in marine vertebrate biology at Scripps Institution of Oceanography in Loyola, California, the previous year, and the Woods Hole position was her first postdoctoral appointment. She had been at the institution for 96 days when the cetacean reels arrived on her desk. The senior researcher who overruled her was Dr. Lawrence Peltier, then 48, the head of the Woods Hole Shark Biology Department, whose published peer-reviewed work on great white shark population dynamics in the New England shelf waters had defined the field for the previous decade. Peltier's published statement on the cetacean incident, issued from Woods Hole on August 21, 1984, attributed the encounter to an unusually large great white shark, likely an immature female of an exceptional but not unprecedented size class for the region. The published statement did not reference the 38-inch bite radius measurement. It did not reference the second reel. It did not reference Dr. Whitcomb's memo. It would be the official institutional position of Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution on the cetacean incident for the next 20 years. The published Peltier statement satisfied the Massachusetts Environmental Police, satisfied the Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies, and satisfied the Cape Cod Times, which had run a front-page story on the incident on July 16, 1984, under the headline "Tourists Witness Rare Shark Attack on Whale Calf off Provincetown." The published statement did not satisfy Captain Owen Beltran. In a 2003 oral history interview conducted by the Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies, preserved on cassette in their archive, and partially transcribed in a 2009 academic paper, Beltran, then 66 years old and retired from commercial whale watching, made the following statement on the record. "I read the Woods Hole letter when it came out. I was on the boat. I had 19 years on Stellwagen. I knew what a great white looked like. What came up beside the cetacean that morning was not a great white shark. I told the Massachusetts Environmental Police it was not a great white shark. I told the Coast Guard it was not a great white shark. I told my own wife it was not a great white shark. And every educated man in a white coat between Provincetown and Washington spent the next 20 years explaining to me why I was wrong about my own boat in my own waters." The 2003 interview is the longest single statement Beltran made on the record about the cetacean incident. He died of cardiac arrest in his home in Provincetown in 2007. The bite radius measurement Dr. Marion Whitcomb made in August 1984, 38 inches tooth tip to tooth tip, has been independently verified 4 times. Since the original Freedom of Information Act release of her memo in 1991, it was verified in 1993 by a vertebrate paleontologist at the Florida Museum of Natural History, who compared the measurement against fossil Otodus Megalodon dentition curves and concluded that the recovered figure fell within the lower size range of confirmed adult Megalodon specimens. It was verified in 1997 by a forensic odontologist at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, who applied standard forensic bite mark methodology to the scaled frame and confirmed Whitcomb's original figure to within half an inch. It was verified in 2002 by a marine biology graduate student at Stony Brook University, whose master's thesis on the methodology of bite mark forensic analysis used the Corinne Doyle frame as a case study. It was verified in 2009 by the same Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies research team that had filed the original 1991 FOIA request. In every case, the methodology produced a figure between 36 and 39 inches. In every case, the measurement exceeds the largest documented great white shark bite on the published scientific record by a factor of more than 2. The Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution has never publicly retracted the 1984 Peltier statement. It has never publicly acknowledged the Whitcomb memo. It has never publicly addressed the 4 independent verifications of the bite radius measurement. In a 2011 statement issued in response to a question from a Boston Globe science reporter, the Woods Hole Communications Office characterized the institution's 1984 finding as consistent with the marine biological understanding of the period and not subject to revision based on subsequent secondary analysis. The 1983 Paleobiology paper documenting fossil Megalodon bite marks on Miocene whale vertebrae from the New England continental shelf, the paper that established the predation signature on cow-calf pairs as a recurring fossil pattern, was cited in Dr. Marion Whitcomb's August 1984 internal memo. It was not cited in Dr. Lawrence Peltier's published statement. Dr. Marion Whitcomb was reassigned out of the Woods Hole Shark Biology Department on January 14, 1985, 5 months after the cetacean incident and 148 days after she submitted her internal memorandum. Her new assignment was a clerical position in the institution's Grants Administration Office. She remained at Woods Hole in that position for 14 months before resigning to take a teaching position at a community college in upstate New York. She has not published in the peer-reviewed marine biology literature since 1984. She declined 3 separate requests for interview about the cetacean incident in 1991, 1997, and 2009. She is, as of the date of this report, still living. The man at the upper deck rail of the cetacean in Corinne, Doyle's footage, the man in the short-sleeved blue shirt and sun, visor whose face was visible directly above the animal's eye in the recovered film, was identified by the Massachusetts Environmental Police Investigation as Lloyd Carraway, a 53-year-old plumbing contractor from Brockton, Massachusetts, on a day trip with his wife. Carraway gave a sworn statement to the Massachusetts Environmental Police on July 17, 1984. His statement, recorded by Trooper William Sennett of the Marine Division, contains the following passage. I was at the rail. It came up directly beneath me. The eye was bigger than my head. It looked at me, and I looked at it, and I want it on the record that what I am telling you is what I saw with my own eyes from a distance of less than 4 feet, and what I saw was not a fish that anyone has a name for. Lloyd Carraway died of natural causes in 1996 at the age of 65. Corinne Doyle's 8mm Kodak reel was returned to her by the Massachusetts Environmental Police in October 1984 after the analysis at Woods Hole was complete. The reel remained in her possession for the rest of her life. She passed away in 2018. In her will, the reel was bequeathed to the Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies, where it is currently held in their archive in a climate-controlled storage facility. The second reel, the wide-angle footage from the Portuguese Princess, was deposited with Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in August 1984 by the unnamed passenger who filmed it, and has not been publicly viewed since. Its current whereabouts are not part of the institutional public record. The Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies submitted a written request for access to the Portuguese Princess reel in 2011 in connection with their ongoing research into the cetacean incident. The request was denied without explanation. Captain Owen Beltran's 19 seasons of commercial whale watching ended with the 1984 season. He never operated a passenger vessel on Stellwagen Bank again. 7 years after the cetacean incident, on the eastern slope of Stellwagen Bank, 25 miles east of Boston, in the same body of water that the Karen Doyle reel and the Portuguese Princess reel had documented, a steel-hulled commercial cod dragger named the Ellen Marie was hauling a full net over the stern when something struck her hull from below with enough force to lift her stern 4 feet clear of the surface. The Ellen Marie's wheelhouse video surveillance camera was running. The camera had been installed 6 months earlier inside a sealed waterproof housing as a condition of her commercial fishing insurance coverage. The footage that camera captured between the moment of the first impact and the moment the vessel went under recorded everything. The Ellen Marie sank in 11 minutes. Her crew of 4 survived. The wheelhouse footage was recovered by United States Coast Guard Sector, Boston, the following morning from the floating debris field. It was routed for analysis to Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, where Dr. Lawrence Peltier, the same researcher whose 1984 published statement on the cetacean incident was, by 1991, the established institutional position on the Stellwagen Bank waters, reviewed the recovered tape. He refused to put his name on a finding. He forwarded the footage, the recovered tooth fragment, and the case file to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., where Dr. Eleanor Ashby of the Department of Paleobiology agreed to perform the comparative analysis. What she found in her lab notebook, what the Smithsonian put in writing to the Ellen Marie's insurance carrier, and what those 2 documents, placed side by side after the 2004 Freedom of Information Act release, actually show is the rest of this report. The evidence presented in the first half of this report, the 2 recovered 8mm Kodachrome reels, the 38-inch bite radius measurement, the suppressed Whitcomb memo, and the published Peltier statement, was, until the autumn of 1991, the only formal documentation of an unidentified large predator on Stellwagen Bank held by any American scientific institution. That changed on November 3, 1991, at 4:17 in the afternoon Eastern Standard Time, when the steel-hulled commercial cod dragger, Ellen Marie, was working a routine groundfish haul on the eastern slope of Stellwagen Bank, 25 miles east of Boston, at 42 degrees 21 minutes north latitude, and her stern was lifted 4 feet clear of the surface by a strike from below. The Ellen Marie sank in 11 minutes. Her wheelhouse video surveillance camera was running when the strike occurred. The recovered VHS tape became the second piece of recorded creature evidence on Stellwagen Bank in 7 years. The Smithsonian Institution's Department of Paleobiology, Washington, D.C., agreed to perform the morphological comparison on the physical evidence recovered from the wreck 3 years later. What that institution wrote in its lab notebook, what it wrote in its official letter to the Ellen Marie's insurance carrier, and the difference between those 2 documents is the second half of this report. The Ellen Marie was a 74-foot steel-hulled commercial cod dragger out of Gloucester, Massachusetts, built in 1971 at the Gowdy and Stevens shipyard in East Boothbay, Maine. Her hull plating was 3/8-inch cold-rolled marine steel. Her trawl winch was a hydraulic Pullmaster M12, capable of hauling a fully loaded cod end weighing in excess of 12,000 pounds. She was certified, surveyed, and insured for commercial ground fishing operations on the New England fishing banks year-round. Her captain on November 3, 1991, was a 56-year-old Gloucester native named Russell Doyle, who held an unrestricted United States merchant mariner credential and had operated commercial fishing vessels out of Gloucester Harbor for 31 consecutive years. Doyle's first mate was Mike Venuti, 38, a Cape Cod native from Eastham who had worked the New England ground fishing fleet since the age of 17. 2 additional deckhands rounded out the 4-man crew. Tomas Vasquez, 26, a recent immigrant from the Azores, working his second season aboard the Ellen Marie, and Eddie Petrov, 41, a career ground fisherman from New Bedford who had crewed for Doyle for the previous 6 seasons. 6 months before the events of November 3, 1991, the Ellen Marie's commercial fishing insurance carrier, North Atlantic Maritime Mutual of Boston, had required Captain Doyle, as a condition of policy renewal, to install a tamper-resistant video surveillance camera inside the wheelhouse of the vessel. The stated purpose of the requirement was the documentation of routine bridge operations for insurance loss adjustment purposes in the event of a future claim. Doyle resented the requirement. He paid for the camera and the sealed waterproof housing out of his own pocket and had the unit installed by a marine electronics shop in Gloucester in May 1991. The camera was a fixed Panasonic AG-180 industrial surveillance unit, mounted behind the helm position, recording continuously to a sealed VHS cartridge in a watertight pressure housing rated to 150 feet of seawater submersion. The Ellen Marie cleared Gloucester Harbor at 04:30 Eastern Standard Time on the morning of November 3, 1991. Her destination was the eastern slope of Stellwagen Bank. The forecast was raw, a northwesterly wind at 15 to 20 knots, air temperature in the high 30s, sea state 2 to 3 feet, intermittent rain showers from a low-pressure system tracking east through the Gulf of Maine. Doyle's logbook for the morning records normal departure procedures and a routine transit time of approximately 3.5 hours to the working ground. By 8 in the morning, the Ellen Marie was working her first tow of the day in 220 feet of water on the bank's eastern slope. Her morning haul was unremarkable, approximately 8,000 pounds of mixed cod and haddock, sorted and iced in the fish hold by midday. By mid-afternoon, she was on her second tow. The second tow ran for approximately 3 hours and 12 minutes. At 4:15 Eastern Standard Time, with the late November sun already low behind the heavy overcast and the deck lights coming on against the failing light, Doyle gave the order to haul the second net. The hydraulic winch began bringing the tow cables in over the stern. The trawl doors broke the surface at 4:16. The strike came at 4:17. What the Ellen Marie's wheelhouse VHS surveillance camera recorded during the next 93 seconds is the second piece of recorded creature footage in the documented history of Stellwagen Bank. It is the only piece of footage in the documented history of the New England commercial fishing fleet that shows a steel-hulled commercial vessel being struck from below by an animal. The Coast Guard Sector Boston Technical Analysis Report on the recovered tape filed under case number USCGSB 91103 and partially declassified in 2004 describes the first 30 seconds of the recording in the following terms. At 1617 hours and 4 seconds Eastern Standard Time, the camera recorded a sustained vertical impact against the underside of the vessel's stern hull plating. The impact was of sufficient magnitude to lift the vessel's stern rail 4 feet clear of the surrounding water surface and to throw the first mate, who was on deck clearing the trawl wires at the time of the strike, approximately 12 feet across the workdeck. The first mate is identified in the report as Michael Venuti. He is visible on the recovered tape from the moment of the strike, sprawled flat on his back on the wet steel deck in his standard issue orange commercial fisherman's oilskin oilers, one arm raised defensively above his head. His position on the deck does not change for the next 11 seconds of recorded footage. What does change is the position of the trawl rigging. The starboard trawl door, a rectangular weathered steel structure approximately 4 feet wide and 6 feet tall, the size of a household barn door, was at the moment of the strike still in the air above the stern rail at the end of its tow cable, in the standard hauling position, approximately 8 feet above the water surface. In the 11 seconds following the strike, the trawl door does not return to the surface of the water. It rises. In the recovered footage, the trawl door rises smoothly upward from its hauling position, reaches a height of approximately 12 feet above the waterline, and then stops in mid-air, swaying slightly, with the torn end of its tow cable trailing loose behind it. It is being held there. The Ellen Marie's wheelhouse video surveillance camera, the Panasonic AG-180 industrial unit, installed in May 1991 in its sealed waterproof, pressure housing rated to 150 feet of seawater submersion, was the only fixed video surveillance camera installed on a commercial ground fishing vessel working the New England fishing banks in the autumn of 1991. It was a unit ahead of its time. The widespread installation of fixed wheelhouse video surveillance on commercial fishing vessels in the United States did not become common practice until the early 2000s, when fisheries observer programs and federal at-sea monitoring requirements began mandating the installations as part of fisheries management compliance. In November 1991, the technology existed. The insurance industry had begun to require it on selected high-value commercial vessels for specific liability documentation purposes. The fishermen who paid for the installations resented the cost and the surveillance. Captain Russell Doyle had been one of 3 Gloucester groundfish captains required by North Atlantic Maritime Mutual to install a wheelhouse camera as a condition of his 1991 policy renewal. He paid the $480 installation cost out of his own pocket. He told the marine electronics technician who installed the unit, in a conversation later recounted under oath in civil deposition, that the camera was a waste of his money and would never record anything that mattered to anyone. The camera ran continuously from the moment Doyle started the engines on the morning of November 3, 1991. The sealed VHS cartridge inside the waterproof pressure housing recorded the routine 4:30 harbor departure, the 3.5-hour transit to the working ground, the unremarkable first tow of the morning, the sorting and icing of the morning's catch, and every word of the routine VHF radio exchanges Doyle conducted with 3 other Gloucester boats working the same waters that afternoon. It was running at 4:17 in the afternoon when the trawl door rose from its hauling position and stopped in midair 12 feet above the waterline, swaying gently, held there by something that the camera, the captain, and the first mate could not yet see. The thing that was holding the trawl door in the air 12 feet above the waterline of the Ellen Marie at 1617 hours on November 3, 1991, became visible on the recovered wheelhouse footage at 1617 hours and 17 seconds. It rose slowly above the height of the stern rail. The Coast Guard Sector Boston Technical Analysis Report describes what then became visible on the recovered tape as follows. A broad, blunt cranial structure, partially out of water, mottled dark gray with pale lighter patches across the visible dorsal surface, with one eye visible above the level of the stern rail on the side of the head facing the wheelhouse camera. A series of oversized openings along the side of the head, consistent with the gill slit morphology of a large lamniform shark. The lower jaw was inside the rim of the trawl door. The upper jaw was clamped through the steel of the door from the outside. Multiple triangular dental structures were visible at the points where the jaw made contact with the steel. Behind the head, breaking the surface of the disturbed Atlantic water beyond the stern rail, was a single dorsal fin, dark in color, with what the Coast Guard analyst described as concretional growths along its leading edge. The animal was holding the 4-foot by 6-foot rectangular steel trawl door in its jaws. It was wider at the head than the trawl door it was holding. The next 46 seconds of the recovered wheelhouse footage, which were time-stamped, frame-counted, and deposited as Exhibit B in the civil litigation file Doyle versus North Atlantic Maritime Mutual, Suffolk County Superior Court, Case number 923104, show what the animal did with the trawl door it had taken from the Ellen Marie. It shook it. The head twisted hard to the right, then hard to the left, then hard to the right again, and the rectangular steel door whipped through the air above the sprawled body of the first mate on the deck of the dragger like a piece of paper held in a closing door. The torn end of the tow cable that had connected the trawl door to the Ellen Marie's hauling rig swung loose behind it, slapping against the stern rail with each twist of the head. The footage shows white spray erupting upward in violent columns from the waterline at the stern, where the body of the animal was striking the underside of the Ellen Marie's hull plating in. Sustained vertical impacts at a rhythm of approximately 1 strike per second. The wheelhouse camera frame visibly vibrates in the recovered footage with each impact from below. The cod and rope and torn netting scattered across the workdeck of the dragger shift and slide with the vibration. Mike Venuti, the first mate, is visible throughout the entire 46-second sequence on the deck. He does not stand up. He does not run. What he does do, and what the recovered footage shows in unbroken continuity for the entire duration of the encounter, is push himself slowly backward across the wet steel deck of the Ellen Marie, with both hands flat against the deck planks behind him and both heels braced against the deck in front of him. He scoots backward in short, deliberate jerks, away from the stern rail and away from the animal and the trawl door in the direction of the wheelhouse. His head and his shoulders remain angled the entire time toward the creature behind him. His face is visible in the recovered footage. His eyes do not leave the eye of the animal at the stern rail for the duration of the sequence. In his sworn deposition statement, taken on March 14, 1992, in the offices of the Suffolk County Superior Court, Venuti was asked by counsel for North Atlantic Maritime Mutual whether at any point during the encounter he believed himself to be in physical danger from the animal at the stern rail of the Ellen Marie. His recorded answer was as follows. I was on a steel deck. The thing at the rail was holding a trawl door in its mouth, like the trawl door was a saltine cracker. One have been on commercial fishing boats for 21 years. I have never seen an animal in any ocean. I have worked that could lift one of my trawl doors out of the water with its mouth. I scooted backward across the deck of my own boat on my back like a child, without taking my eyes off it, because I had read enough about animals in the water to know that if you turn your back on a thing that big in a thing that small, the thing that big will take you off the deck of the thing that's small in the same way it took the door, and I did not want to be taken off the deck of my boat. Counsel for North Atlantic Maritime Mutual did not ask Mike Venuti a follow-up question. North Atlantic Maritime Mutual of Boston received the recovered Ellen Marie Wheelhouse VHS cartridge from United States Coast Guard sector, Boston, on November 11, 1991, 8 days after the sinking, and 3 days after the formal claim was filed by Captain Russell Doyle for total loss of vessel and gear. The carrier referred the tape to its in-house marine forensic engineering department for analysis. The forensic analysis was completed on December 19, 1991. The conclusion of the report, signed by Senior Marine Forensic Engineer Robert M. Halloran of North Atlantic Maritime Mutual's Boston office, was that the Ellen Marie wheelhouse footage was a fabrication. Specifically, the Halloran report concluded that the visible animal in the recovered footage was an inserted optical effect, that the apparent vertical impact lifting the stern rail had been staged through the deliberate sabotage of the vessel's through-hole cooling water intake fittings, and that the entire incident represented a coordinated insurance fraud scheme on the part of Captain Doyle for the purpose of recovering the policy value of a vessel he could no longer afford to operate profitably. The report was approved by the Carrier's Claims Committee on January 6, 1992. The total loss claim was denied. A civil suit alleging fraudulent claim filing was initiated against Captain Russell Doyle in Suffolk County Superior Court on January 22, 1992. The case number was 923104. In support of the carrier's allegation that the Ellen Marie wheelhouse footage was a fabrication, the carrier requested and received independent scientific authentication from a qualified American marine science institution. The institution they wrote to was the Smithsonian Institution's Department of Paleobiology in Washington, D.C. The researcher who answered the request was Dr. Eleanor Ashby. Dr. Eleanor Ashby was, in 1992, a 46-year-old senior research curator in the Smithsonian Institution's Department of Paleobiology, with a doctorate in vertebrate paleontology from Yale University and 21 years of curated research experience on fossil shark dentition, specifically including the type specimens of Otodus megalodon held in the museum's permanent collection. She was, by professional reputation, the leading American authority on the morphological identification of fossil and recent lamniform shark teeth. She was also, at the time the request from North Atlantic Maritime Mutual arrived on her desk in February 1992, the supervising curator on a Smithsonian publication project documenting the museum's complete vertebrate paleontology dentition holdings, a project that had been continuously funded by an endowment partially backed by a consortium of New England maritime insurance carriers, including North Atlantic Maritime Mutual, since 1987. Dr. Ashby reviewed the recovered Ellen Marie Wheelhouse VHS footage in the Smithsonian's Audiovisual Conservation Facility in February 1992. She made one written observation in her personal lab notebook on the date of her review. The observation, recorded in her handwriting, dated February 19, 1992, and recovered through the 2004 Freedom of Information Act release of the Smithsonian's Cape Cod incident file, reads as follows. Frame-by-frame review of the recovered Ellen Marie Wheelhouse footage shows clear morphological consistency with Otodus megalodon dentition curves, gill slit count and spacing, cranial proportional ratios, and dorsal fin geometry. The animal in the footage is anatomically consistent with the type specimens in our museum collection. Dr. Ashby's official letter to North Atlantic Maritime Mutual on Smithsonian Institution Department of Paleobiology letterhead, dated March 2, 1992, contained none of the language in her lab notebook. The Smithsonian official position, as transmitted to North Atlantic Maritime Mutual on March 2, 1992, and submitted into evidence in Doyle v. North Atlantic Maritime Mutual on March 11, 1992, was as follows. The recovered footage from the FV Ellen Marie depicts an unidentified marine wildlife event of ambiguous biological character. The Smithsonian Institution is unable to confirm the species identification of the animal visible in the footage. In the absence of physical evidence and pending further analysis, the recovered footage is insufficient to establish the presence of a known marine predator capable of producing the structural damage claimed by the vessel master. The Smithsonian Institution declines to identify the animal in the footage. Translated into the language of the civil litigation in which the Smithsonian letter was admitted as expert testimony, the institution's position was that the most prestigious scientific authority on fossil and recent lamniform shark identification in the United States was unable to confirm that the thing in the recovered footage was a real animal at all. The Doyle defense had no answer for the Smithsonian letter. His attorney, a Gloucester-based maritime litigator named Frank Capizzi, attempted to subpoena Dr. Ashby for live testimony in Suffolk County Superior Court in May 1992. The Smithsonian Institution responded through its Office of General Counsel in Washington, D.C., asserting that Dr. Ashby's expert opinion, as memorialized in the March 2nd letter, constituted the totality of the institution's position on the matter, and that no further testimony was available. The subpoena was not enforced. The civil trial proceeded on the basis of the written record. Doyle v. North Atlantic Maritime Mutual was decided in favor of the carrier on October 19, 1992. Captain Russell Doyle was found liable for fraudulent claim filing on the total loss of the FVV Ellen Marie. He was ordered to pay restitution to North Atlantic Maritime Mutual in the amount of $193,000, plus court costs and legal fees totaling an additional $71,000. He lost his commercial merchant mariner credential the same week as the verdict. He sold his house in Gloucester to satisfy the restitution order in February 1993. He moved into a one-bedroom apartment above a hardware store on Main Street in Gloucester and never operated a commercial fishing vessel again. In the spring of 1994, 18 months after the civil verdict against Captain Russell Doyle, and 28 months after the sinking of the FVV Ellen Marie, a recreational salvage diver from Marblehead, Massachusetts, named Theodore Marlins, descended on the Ellen Marie wreck site on the eastern slope of Stellwagen Bank for the purpose of recovering personal effects and small marine hardware for sale to maritime memorabilia collectors. The dive was conducted on May 14, 1994, in 240 feet of water. Marlin surfaced from his second dive of the day with a section of the Eleanor's stern hull plating, approximately 14 inches by 22 inches, that he had cut free from the wreck with a hydraulic shear. Embedded in the steel of the hull plating, at a depth of approximately 1¼ inches into the 3/8 inch cold-rolled marine steel, was a fragment of a serrated triangular tooth. The tooth fragment was the broken-off tip of a much larger tooth. It measured approximately 2 inches in length along its longest visible edge and approximately 1¼ inches across its widest point. Marlins was familiar enough with marine biology to recognize that what he was looking at was not a piece of metal, was not a piece of marine debris, and did not match any tooth he had ever seen embedded in salvaged hull plating in 19 years of recreational wreck diving. He brought the hull section, with the tooth fragment intact, to the Smithsonian Institution's Department of Paleobiology in Washington, D.C. on June 4, 1994. He delivered it in person to the front desk of the museum's Vertebrate Paleontology Administrative Office. The Smithsonian's Department of Paleobiology accessioned the marlin specimen into its temporary research holdings on June 4, 1994, under accession number SIP B940604, and assigned it to Dr. Eleanor Ashby for morphological analysis. Dr. Ashby's lab notebook entry on the marlin specimen, dated June 17, 1994, is the second of the two key documents released by the Smithsonian under the 2004 Freedom of Information Act request. The June 17th lab notebook entry reads as follows. The marlin specimen tooth fragment is morphologically indistinguishable from the apical region of a juvenile otodus megalodon tooth as represented in the museum-type collection. Serration pitch, enamel cross-section, pulp cavity geometry, and basal curvature are all within the standard variance ranges established for the species. The fragment is fresh. There is no fossilization, no mineralization, no diagenetic alteration of any kind. Whatever animal lost this tooth, it lost it recently. The Smithsonian Institution's Office of General Counsel was notified of Dr. Eleanor Ashby's June 17, 1994, lab notebook entry on the marlin specimen on June 21, 1994. The internal correspondence between Dr. Ashby and the Smithsonian's General Counsel Office between June 21st and July 8, 1994, 16 pages of memoranda, internal emails, and handwritten notes recovered through the 2004 Freedom of Information Act release, addresses one specific concern. The concern is identified in 3 separate memoranda by the same phrase. The phrase is exposure to the North Atlantic litigation. The Smithsonian Institution's institutional position on the marlin specimen, as transmitted to North Atlantic Maritime Mutual on July 14, 1994, when the carrier requested institutional confirmation of the recovered tooth fragment in support of its 1992 forensic finding, was as follows. The marlin specimen is best characterized as an ambiguous biological sample, possibly representing post-mortem contamination of the wreck site by an unrelated marine source, and is insufficient to alter the established forensic record of the Ellen Mary incident as adjudicated in Suffolk County Superior Court. The Smithsonian Institution declines to identify the species of animal from which the marlin specimen tooth fragment originated. The marlin specimen was deaccessioned from the Smithsonian's research holdings in October 1994 and returned to Theodore Marlins by registered mail. It has not been available for independent scientific analysis since. Theodore Marlins kept the hull section and the embedded tooth fragment in his personal collection until his death in 2017. The current whereabouts of the specimen are unknown. Captain Russell Doyle of Gloucester, Massachusetts, died of liver cancer in his one-bedroom apartment above a hardware store on Main Street on August 11, 1999, at the age of 64. He had not held a merchant mariner credential in 7 years at the time of his death. He had spent the final years of his life as a part-time clerk in the same hardware store beneath his apartment. In his will, the only items he asked be preserved were his original ship's logbooks from 31 seasons of all, commercial ground fishing, and a copy of the recovered Wheelhouse VHS cassette that the Suffolk County Superior Court had ruled in 1992 to be a fabrication. Mike Venuti, the first mate of the Ellen Marie, returned to commercial fishing in 1993 after a 6-month medical leave for the back injury he sustained when the strike threw him across the deck. He never worked aboard a New England groundfish dragger again. He spent the remainder of his career on inshore lobster boats out of Eastham, Massachusetts. He gave the only on-the-record interview of his life about the Ellen Marie incident in 2009 to a writer for Yankee magazine. In that interview, he made one statement that has been quoted in every subsequent reference to the Ellen Marie incident. "I will tell you what was in the water that afternoon, and I will tell you what was on the deck of my boat, and I will tell you what came up over the stern rail with one of my trawl doors in its jaws, and the difference between what I saw and what the Smithsonian Institution wrote down in a letter to the insurance company that put my captain in a 1-bedroom apartment for the last 7 years of his life is the difference between the truth and a lie that a powerful institution told to protect a check." The 2004 Freedom of Information Act release of the Smithsonian Institution's Cape Cod incident file, the release that produced Dr. Eleanor Ashby's February 19, 1992, lab notebook entry, her June 17, 1994, lab notebook entry, and the 16 pages of correspondence with the Office of General Counsel, was the result of a 5-year administrative request filed by the Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies in 1999. The lab notebook entries and the official letters were placed side by side for the first time in the public record on March 4, 2004. The official extinction date for Otodus megalodon, as published by the National Marine Fisheries Service and the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of Natural History, remains, as of the date of this report, approximately 3.6 million years ago. The Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary Administrative Regulations governing public outreach materials, last revised in 2012, prohibit the discussion of unclassified predator identifications by sanctuary staff in any official capacity. Whether what was in the water alongside the cetacean on July 14, 1984, and what came up over the stern rail of the Ellen Marie on November 3, 1991, was a surviving population of an animal the fossil record declares extinct, or something the deep waters of the Wilkinson Basin have been keeping from American science for longer than American science has been counting, remains officially undetermined. What is no longer undetermined? After the 2004 Freedom of Information Act release of the Smithsonian Institution's Cape Cod incident file, is what at least one prestigious American scientific institution wrote in its private records about the evidence, and what it wrote in its public letters about the same evidence on the same week. The two documents are not the same. If you have information about the cetacean incident of July 14, 1984, the sinking of the FV Ellen Marie on November 3, 1991, the current whereabouts of the Portuguese Princess wide-angle reel, or the current whereabouts of the marlin specimen tooth fragment, the comments section beneath this video is monitored. Subscribe to Maritime Incident Files for the next report.